I raised my daughter on my own. My ex-wife showed up and started manipulating her. My daughter stole $25K, and my brother-in-law me, then ex disappeared. I've been a single dad, 53M, to my daughter Jessica, 27F, since she was 7 years old. Her mom, Amy, left us for another man and moved to the other side of the country. It wasn't easy, but I did my best to give Jessica a good life. I worked tirelessly as a financial analyst, often putting in late nights and working through weekends to ensure we were financially secure. I made sure Jessica had everything she needed, from a strong education to various extracurricular activities, and I always tried to be there for her emotionally. I still vividly remember the day Amy left us. I came home from work to find her bags packed by the front door, and Jessica sobbing on the living room sofa. Amy told me she had met someone else and was leaving that night. She didn't even properly say goodbye to Jessica, just kissed her on the forehead and walked out. The first few months after she left were incredibly difficult. Jessica would cry herself to sleep every night, asking when Mommy was coming back. I'd hold her close and try to explain, but how do you tell a 7-year-old that her mother chose a new life over her? I was drowning in my own grief and anger while trying to stay strong for my daughter. We eventually found a new rhythm. I learned to juggle work and single parenthood, though I often felt like I was failing at both. I'd rush home from the office to make dinner, help with homework, and try to give Jessica the attention she needed. Many nights, I'd collapse into bed, completely exhausted, wondering if I was doing enough. Despite all the challenges, Jessica and I were close. When she was younger, I'd take her to the playground every Saturday, help her with school projects, and we'd have movie nights at home with popcorn I made from scratch. Jessica was a bright and curious kid with a big heart, always making me handmade cards for my birthday or Father's Day, filled with glitter and declarations of how I was the best dad in the world. Those memories make the present situation even harder to bear. I tried to ensure Jessica had as normal a childhood as possible. I enrolled her in dance classes, took her on nature trips, and cheered her on at every school event. I wanted her to know that even though her mom was gone, she was still deeply loved and supported. But as Jessica got older, things began to change. The sweet little girl who used to love spending time with her dad turned into a moody teenager almost overnight. Suddenly, hanging out with me wasn't cool anymore. She started pushing boundaries, staying out past her curfew, and hanging out with a crowd I didn't approve of. We clashed a lot during those years. I remember one particularly heated argument when Jessica was 15. She came home well past her curfew, reeking of alcohol. When I confronted her, she lashed out, screaming that I was ruining her life and that she wished she lived with her mom instead. Those words cut deep. I knew she was just angry, but it still hurt to hear my daughter say she'd rather be with the woman who abandoned her. Despite the rocky period, I still did everything I could for Jessica. I paid for her to attend a top university, covered the rent for her off-campus apartment, and even bought her a car for her 22nd birthday. Looking back, I might have overcompensated out of guilt for her mom leaving. I just wanted her to have the best life possible. During Jessica's college years, our relationship improved somewhat. She called home more often, and we'd have nice conversations about her classes and future plans. I started to feel like we'd finally turned a corner. I was proud of the young woman she was becoming and looked forward to seeing where life would take her. Jessica started dating her now fiancé Brian, 29M, about 3 years ago, shortly after she graduated from college. I had reservations about him from the beginning. He comes from a very wealthy family and has never had to work hard for anything in his life. His parents own a large and successful construction company, and Brian has a cushy job there that he clearly got through connections. He drives a luxury SUV, wears expensive designer clothes, and carries that arrogant attitude of someone who's never been told no in his life. I remember the first time Jessica brought Brian home to meet me. He walked into our house like he owned the place, barely shook my hand, and spent the entire dinner making subtle jabs about our modest home. He seemed shocked when I mentioned having to work overtime sometimes, clearly looking down on us for not being as affluent as his family. On the surface, Brian is charming, always ready with a smooth compliment or a funny story at family gatherings. But I always felt something was off about him, the way he'd make snide comments or act surprised when I mentioned everyday financial concerns. It was like he couldn't comprehend that not everyone had access to unlimited wealth. I tried to overlook my concerns because Jessica was head over heels for him. She'd gush about how Brian treated her like a queen, taking her on extravagant dates and buying her expensive gifts. I worried he was overwhelming her with too much too fast, but whenever I gently tried to bring up my concerns, Jessica would accuse me of being jealous or trying to sabotage her happiness. So I mostly kept my thoughts to myself. As Jessica and Brian's relationship progressed, I noticed changes in my daughter. She became more focused on material things, always talking about the latest designer handbag or the upscale restaurants Brian took her to. She started making comments about how she couldn't wait to live the kind of life Brian's family enjoyed. It was as if the grounded, down-to-earth girl I raised was slipping away from me. Fast forward to 7 months ago, Jessica and Brian got engaged, and she immediately threw herself into planning an extravagant wedding. At first, I was happy for her. Every father dreams of walking his little girl down the aisle, right? But things quickly spiraled out of control. Jessica started talking about having a massive, elaborate wedding at an exclusive vineyard estate. We're talking over 400 guests, a weekend-long affair, the works. She wanted a custom designer gown, a 15-piece band, gourmet catering, the whole 9 yards. When she showed me the estimated budget, I nearly fell out of my chair. It was well over $125,000. I sat Jessica down and tried to have a reasonable conversation about finances. I explained that while I wanted her to have a beautiful wedding, I simply couldn't afford to contribute that kind of money. I walked her through my finances, showing her that between my mortgage, car payments, and trying to save for retirement, there just wasn't $125,000 lying around. I offered to contribute $25,000, which I thought was more than generous given my financial situation. Jessica flipped out. She started crying and yelling about how I was ruining her dream wedding and didn't love her. She brought up every expensive thing I'd ever bought for myself, like the motorcycle I got after saving for years, or the new laptop I bought last year, using them as proof that I had money to spare. She conveniently ignored the fact that I had to save up for those things for years. I was shocked by her reaction. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. I tried to reason with her, suggesting ways to have a beautiful wedding on a more realistic budget. I even offered to help her with DIY decorations or finding a less expensive venue, but Jessica wasn't having it. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Over the next few weeks, Jessica kept pushing the issue. She'd send me pictures of wedding dresses that cost more than my entire annual salary, or links to outrageously expensive venues. Each time, I gently reminded her that my budget hadn't changed, and each time she'd get upset, give me the silent treatment for a few days, then start up again. It was exhausting. Brian got involved too, which only made things worse. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about how his parents were contributing whatever it took to give Jessica her dream wedding, unlike some people. He even had the audacity to suggest I take out a second mortgage on my house to pay for the wedding. When I refused, he implied that I clearly didn't care about Jessica's happiness. I tried talking to Brian's parents, hoping they might be the voice of reason, but that backfired spectacularly. They were aghast that I wasn't willing to sacrifice everything for my only daughter's special day. Brian's mom even offered to loan me the money with a condescending pat on the arm. I left that conversation feeling angry and belittled. Things came to a head about a month ago. Jessica showed up at my house unannounced one evening, all smiles and sweetness, which immediately put me on edge. She sat me down and started talking about how she'd found the perfect venue, but needed to put down a $60 deposit to hold the date. Before I could even respond, she hit me with it. She needed me to write a check for $40,000 right then and there. I was floored. I told her absolutely not, reminding her once again that I'd already committed to $25,000 total. Jessica's demeanor changed instantly. She started screaming at me, calling me selfish and accusing me of never loving her. She brought up her mom leaving, saying I was abandoning her just like Amy did. She accused me of loving money more than her, and said she'd never forgive me if I ruined her wedding. It was like a switch had flipped, and she'd become a different person. I stayed calm and told Jessica she needed to leave. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I figured she just needed time to cool off, and we'd be able to talk things through in a few days. I had no idea what was coming next. The following week, I went to transfer some money between accounts, and noticed something was off. My savings account balance was much lower than it should have been. I dug deeper and discovered several large withdrawals I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Jessica had stolen my debit card information and drained nearly $25,000 from my account. I was in shock. I couldn't believe my own daughter would do this to me. I immediately called the bank to report the fraud and cancel my cards. Then I called Jessica. She didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail telling her I knew what she'd done and demanding she return the money immediately. A few hours later, I got a text from Jessica. It said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I had no choice. This is for my wedding, and I deserve to have the day of my dreams. You're being selfish by not supporting me. It'll pay you back eventually." I was livid. I texted back, telling her she had 24 hours to return the money, or I'd be going to the police. She responded with a string of laughing emojis. I couldn't believe how uncaring she was being about stealing from her own father. The next day came and went with no word from Jessica. True to my word, I filed a police report. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic but said it would be tricky to pursue charges since Jessica had access to my home where I kept financial documents. He said they'd investigate, but it might end up being a civil matter. Word got back to Jessica that I'd gone to the police. She showed up at my house in tears with Brian. She begged me to drop the charges, saying it would ruin her life if she had a criminal record. Brian chimed in about how his family had connections with local judges and could make things difficult for me if I pursued this. The whole thing felt like a bad movie. I told them both to leave. I said I'd drop the charges if Jessica returned every penny she stole, plus interest. She huffed and puffed, but eventually agreed. A few days later, the money was back in my account. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Jessica has been on a smear campaign ever since. She's telling anyone who will listen that I'm an abusive father who's trying to ruin her wedding out of spite. She's turned most of our extended family against me. My own sister called to berate me for being so cruel to my only daughter. It feels like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. Brian's family has gotten involved too. His mother called me, saying they'd be happy to help with wedding expenses if I was having financial troubles. The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. I told her exactly where she could stick her charity. Jessica's latest move was to post a long, dramatic story on social media about how her abusive father is trying to ruin the happiest day of her life. She conveniently left out the part where she stole $25,000 from me. The post has gotten hundreds of sympathetic comments, with people offering to donate to her wedding fund. I'm disgusted by the whole thing. I've tried reaching out to Jessica to talk things through, but she's not interested unless I agree to pay for the wedding she wants. Brian answered her phone the last time I called and told me I'm not welcome at the wedding unless I make things right. I'm heartbroken that it's come to this. Some of my friends have suggested I just give in and pay for the wedding to keep the peace. They say I'll regret it if I miss my only daughter's wedding, but I can't bring myself to reward Jessica's behavior. It goes against everything I believe in and everything I thought I'd taught her about responsibility and respect. The whole situation has me questioning everything. I keep replaying Jessica's childhood in my mind, wondering where I went wrong. Did I spoil her too much? Was I too lenient? Should I have pushed harder for her to get a job in college instead of covering all her expenses? I always thought I was doing right by her, but now I'm not so sure. I've barely been sleeping, tossing and turning all night as I worry about the future of my relationship with Jessica. I miss the little girl who used to run to me for hugs and tell me I was her hero. I don't recognize the entitled, angry young woman she's become. I'm standing firm on not paying for this ridiculous wedding. The $25,000 I originally offered is still on the table, but that's my final offer. Jessica can take it or leave it. If she chooses not to have me at her wedding because of this, that's on her conscience, not mine. I've thought about reaching out to Amy to see if she can talk some sense into Jessica, but I'm not sure that's a good idea. Amy hasn't been in Jessica's life for years, and I worry bringing her into this mess would only make things worse. Plus, I'm not sure I can handle dealing with my ex on top of everything else right now. For now, I'm focusing on protecting myself. I've changed all my passwords, put a freeze on my credit, and moved my important documents to a safe deposit box at the bank. It breaks my heart that I have to take these precautions against my own daughter, but I can't risk her trying to steal from me again. Despite everything, I still love Jessica. She's my daughter, and I want her to be happy, but I can't support her at the expense of my own financial security and peace of mind. I hope that someday she'll understand that, and we can repair our relationship. But for now, I'm at a loss. As for now, this is all that has happened. I might put up an update if things escalate. Thank you for reading. Update 1. It's been about 3 months since my last post, and things have only gotten crazier. Thanks to everyone who read my story and offered advice. First off, I didn't cave. That $25,000 offer stayed on the table, and Jessica kept refusing it. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure I'd even give her that much anymore. After my last post, Jessica ramped up her smear campaign against me. She's been posting daily on social media, calling me an abusive father who's trying to ruin her big day. The stories she's telling are ridiculous. Apparently, I've been emotionally manipulating her since childhood, and am jealous of her happiness. It's all nonsense, but people are eating it up. Brian's family got more involved too. His mother started commenting on Jessica's posts, offering sympathy and support. She even started a GoFundMe to help the poor bride have her dream wedding. The fact that people were actually donating to this made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe how easily people were buying into this false narrative. My own family has turned against me. My sister blocked my number and told the rest of the family not to invite me to any gatherings. I tried to explain my side, but no one wants to hear it. They'd rather believe Jessica's fantasy version of events. About 2 months ago, I hit rock bottom. Jessica's maid of honor called to tell me that Jessica had decided to have her stepfather walk her down the aisle. I didn't even know she was in contact with her mom or stepdad. Finding out like that, from someone I barely know, felt like a punch to the gut. I'll admit, I lost it a bit after that. I spent a few days drinking more than I should have, not answering my phone. But then I decided, screw it. If they all want to believe him the bad guy, I might as well play the part. I hired a lawyer and had him draw up papers documenting every penny I've ever spent on Jessica college tuition, rent, car payments, everything. Then I sent her a bill for all of it, with interest. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did it feel good? You bet it did. Jessica went ballistic. She showed up at my house, screaming about how I was trying to financially ruin her. I just stood there calmly and told her she had 28 days to start paying, or I'd take her to court. The look on her face was priceless. Of course, this made things even worse with the family. My sister left me a voicemail calling me every name in the book. Brian's parents threatened to sue me for emotional distress. I told them to get in line. I knew that Jessica had invited her stepfather to walk her down the aisle. But that's when I started noticing some strange posts on Jessica's social media. She was suddenly talking about how great it was to reconnect with her mom, Amy. There were pictures of them shopping for wedding dresses together, having lunch, all smiles and hashtags about mother-daughter bonds. I was confused as far as I knew. Jessica hadn't spoken to Amy in years, and now suddenly they're best friends. Something didn't add up. I did some digging. Turns out, Amy reached out to Jessica about 4 months ago, right around the time this whole wedding drama started. At first I thought maybe Amy had heard about the wedding and wanted to mend fences, but the more I uncovered, the more suspicious I became. Through some mutual friends, I learned that Amy and her husband are deep in debt. They've been struggling financially for years, bouncing from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, and now suddenly they're back in Jessica's life just as she's planning this extravagant wedding. It couldn't be a coincidence. I managed to get access to Jessica's email and ask how. Let's just say I still had some old passwords. What I found made my blood boil. There were dozens of emails between Jessica and Amy, going back months. In them, Amy was clearly manipulating Jessica, pushing her to demand more and more money from me for the wedding. Amy had fed Jessica all sorts of lies about how I owed her this lavish wedding because I ruined her childhood by driving her mother away. She convinced Jessica that if I really loved her, I would spare no expense for her big day. There were even suggestions from Amy about how to guilt-trip me, what buttons to push to get me to cave. The worst part, Amy had been asking Jessica for money, too small amounts at first, just a few hundred here and there for wedding expenses. But the amounts kept growing. In the most recent emails, Amy was asking for thousands, claiming she needed it to buy a mother-of-the-bride dress and to rent a car to get to the wedding. It was all there in black and white. Amy had orchestrated this whole thing, turning Jessica against me, pushing for this ridiculous wedding, all so she could milk us both for cash. She even suggested that her husband should walk Jessica down the aisle, knowing it would hurt me and might push me to open my wallet out of spite. I was furious, not just at Amy for her manipulation, but at myself for not seeing it sooner, and at Jessica for being so easily fooled. How could she not see through Amy's lies? I spent hours staring at those emails, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call Jessica immediately and tell her everything. Another part wanted to confront Amy and make her confess. And a small, petty part of me wanted to sit back and watch it all implode at the wedding. In the end, I decided to sleep on it. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of notifications on my phone. Jessica had posted another rant about me on social media, this time claiming I was trying to buy her off with my $25,000 offer. She said Amy had shown her what real motherly love looks like, and that she was glad to have at least one parent who truly cared about her happiness. Reading that post, something in me snapped. I was done being the villain in this story. I decided it was time to fight fire with fire. I spent the next few hours compiling all the evidence I had, the financial records showing how much I'd spent on Jessica over the years. Everything. Then I made a post of my own, laying it all out for everyone to see. I detailed every penny I'd ever spent on Jessica, her college tuition, rent, car payments, everything. I even included some choice quotes from Jessica's teenage years where she told Amy she never wanted to see her again. But I didn't talk about the manipulation Amy did on Jessica. Was it harsh? Absolutely. Was it potentially relationship ending? Probably. But at that point, I was beyond caring. I was done being manipulated, done being painted as the bad guy, done being everyone's ATM. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started blowing up with calls and messages. Jessica left me a screaming voicemail calling me every name in the book. Brian's parents doubled down on their threats to sue me for defamation. My sister sent me a long text about how I'd gone too far and ruined any chance of reconciliation. But there were supportive messages too. A few family members apologized for believing Jessica's side of the story without hearing mine. Amy, unsurprisingly, has gone radio silent. Her social media accounts have all been deactivated, and she's not returning anyone's calls. Last I heard, she and her husband had suddenly left town for a family emergency. As for Jessica and the wedding, no official word yet. The venue called me still listed as a contact, apparently asking about some unpaid deposits. It seems like things might be imploding all on their own. So now I'm sitting here in the calm eye of the storm I've created, waiting to see what happens next. Part of me feels guilty for potentially blowing up my daughter's life like this, but a bigger part feels relieved to finally have the truth out there. Whatever happens, I'm done being a doormat. I'm done being manipulated and guilted. From here on out, I'm looking out for myself first. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Who knows? Maybe there's still more drama to come in this circus of a wedding saga. But for now, I'm going to pour myself a drink and try to get some rest. Something tells me I'm going to need it for whatever comes next. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and somehow things have managed to get even crazier. I thought I'd seen it all, but apparently the universe had other plans. First off, the wedding is officially off, at least for now. The venue called me again, this time to inform me that all deposits had been forfeited due to non-payment. Apparently, Jessica and Brian missed the final payment deadline by over a week. The schadenfreude is real, folks. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Remember how I mentioned Amy and her husband had left town for a family emergency? Well, turns out that was a big, fat 25,000 lie. 2 days after my last update, I got a call from Brian. Yes, you read that right, Brian called me. He was frantic, almost incoherent. Once I managed to calm him down, he dropped a bombshell: Amy and her husband had emptied Jessica's bank accounts and disappeared. Apparently, in the wake of my expose post, Jessica had a meltdown. She was so distraught that she gave Amy access to her accounts to help with the wedding planning. Amy, being the opportunist she is, saw her chance and took it. She cleaned out Jessica's savings, maxed out her credit cards, and even took out a loan in Jessica's name. Then she and her husband vanished without a trace. Brian was calling me because Jessica was too ashamed to do it herself. They're flat broke, drowning in debt, and have no idea what to do. Part of me wanted to laugh and tell them it wasn't my problem. But I agreed to meet with them, more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. When I saw Jessica, I hardly recognized her. The meeting was tense, to say the least. Jessica couldn't even look me in the eye. Brian did most of the talking, explaining their situation in detail. It's worse than I thought. Not only did Amy steal all their money, but she also left them with a mountain of debt. They're facing potential bankruptcy, and there's even talk of criminal charges for the fraudulent loan. I sat there, listening to their sob story. When they finished, Jessica finally spoke. She apologized, tears streaming down her face. She admitted that she'd been foolish, selfish, and easily manipulated. She said she understood if I never wanted to see her again, but she needed help. I'd love to say I immediately forgave her and offered to fix everything, but I didn't. I told them I needed time to think and left them sitting there in the coffee shop. Here's where it gets even more complicated. Remember Brian's parents, the ones who were threatening to sue me? Well, they reached out too. Turns out they've disowned Brian. They're furious that he allowed Jessica to give Amy access to their money. They've cut him off completely and are washing their hands of the whole situation. So now I'm faced with a decision: do I help Jessica and Brian out of this mess? Part of me thinks they deserve to face the consequences of their actions, but another part remembers the little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees, looking for comfort. I haven't decided what to do yet. I'm consulting with my lawyer to see what the legal implications would be if I got involved. The last thing I need is to get dragged into this mess and end up in financial trouble myself. In the meantime, the family drama continues. My sister, the one who blocked my number, she called to apologize. Apparently, she'd been one of the people Amy had hit up for wedding expenses. She's out a few $1,000s and feeling pretty foolish. She asked if we could mend fences. I'm considering it. As for Amy, there's still no sign of her. The police are involved now, but they're not optimistic. Apparently, Amy and her husband have a history of this kind of thing. They've pulled similar scams in 2 other states. They're pros at disappearing. Jessica and Brian are staying with a friend for now. They've both lost their jobs due to all the drama and missed work. They're facing eviction from their apartment and are selling everything they own to try to cover some of the debt. So that's where things stand. My daughter and her fiancé are broke and facing possible criminal charges. My ex-wife is in the wind with a small fortune in stolen money. Half my family is apologizing, while the other half still thinks I'm the bad guy. And I'm left here, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I'll update again when I've made a decision about whether to help Jessica and Brian. Until then, I'm pouring myself another drink and trying to make sense of how my life turned into a bad soap opera. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update, and I'm ready to close this chapter of my life. A lot has happened. First of all, after some thinking, I've decided that sending Jessica an itemized bill for everything I'd spent on her was a step too far. While it felt satisfying in the moment, it wasn't helpful and could potentially damage any chance of saving our relationship in the future. So I called my lawyer and asked him to draft a letter retracting the bill. In the letter, I explained that while I was still hurt and disappointed by Jessica's actions, I recognized that putting a price tag on parental support wasn't the right way to address the situation. Then I decided to offer Jessica and Brian limited help. I know you guys might get mad at me for this and call me a doormat, but she's still my daughter, the one I raised alone. We met at my lawyer's office, where I laid out my terms. 1. I'd only cover the fraudulent loan Amy took out in Jessica's name. 2. They had to get jobs within 3 weeks. 3. They must attend financial counseling and stick to a budget. 4. They had to cut all ties with Amy if she resurfaced. I made it clear this wasn't forgiveness, just a one-time lifeline. Our relationship remained damaged. With the terms set, we got to work. I paid off the fraudulent loan, which was a significant hit to my savings, but at least it was a finite amount. Jessica and Brian were on their own for the rest of their debts. They moved into a tiny studio apartment and sold most of their possessions to start paying off what they owed. True to their word, they both found jobs within the 3-week deadline. Jessica started waiting tables at a diner, and Brian got work as a custodian at a local school. It was a far cry from their previous lifestyle, but it was honest work. As for Amy and her husband, karma finally caught up with them. About 3 months after I agreed to help Jessica and Brian, Jessica got a call from the police. They'd caught Amy and her husband trying to pull the same scam in another state. Apparently, they'd gotten greedy and sloppy, and it had cost them. The trial was a media circus. Amy's scams had affected dozens of families across multiple states, and the press was having a field day. Jessica was called to testify, and I have to admit, I was impressed by how she handled herself. She took full responsibility for her part in the situation, not trying to shift blame or play the victim. Amy and her husband were ultimately convicted on multiple counts of fraud and grand theft. They're looking at significant prison time, and there's a possibility of restitution for their victims. I'm not holding my breath on getting any money back, but at least they're facing consequences for their actions. I maintained my distance from Jessica and Brian, only checking in with my lawyer for updates on their financial progress. Jessica would occasionally text brief updates about her job or repayment progress. I'd respond with short, polite messages. I've gone no contact with my sister. Her quick betrayal and refusal to take responsibility made me realize that these types of relationships aren't worth saving. About 3 months into this new arrangement, Jessica and Brian hit a rough patch. The stress of their new lifestyle was taking its toll, and they had a huge fight. Jessica called me, crying, saying Brian had walked out and she was afraid he wouldn't come back. I told her that this was part of the consequences of their actions, and that she needed to handle it on her own. To my surprise, Jessica listened. She didn't beg me to intervene or try to guilt me. Instead, she thanked me for listening and said she'd figure it out. Brian came back the next day, and from what I understand, they had a long, hard talk about their future. It seems they're committed to making it work despite the challenges. 3 months ago, Jessica asked to meet. We met at a coffee shop, where she apologized again and asked if we could start rebuilding our relationship. I told her I appreciated her apology and was open to staying in touch, but couldn't promise more right now. Since then, Jessica and I text occasionally, just short check-ins. She recently paid off one of their smaller debts. My relationship with Jessica is still far from good. She's invited me to dinner next month. I've agreed to go, but I'm keeping my expectations low. To everyone who's followed this crazy journey, thank you. Your support and advice have meant more than you know. This will be my final update. It's time to step away from the keyboard and focus on living my life. Signing off for the last time.